Chev, it is truly an auspicious day, I must say, because many people tuned into this today, right? Thinking that they might be hearing another episode of the Hex Drinkers podcast, or maybe another episode of course, critically acclaimed series After Dark.
That's true.
But actually, this is neither of these.
No, it is not.
This is a brand new creation that we have birthed from our budget-loving, common rarity-loving wombs. A whole new podcast that we are creating.
That is correct. There are many different ways that could have been said. I would have loved all of them equally and far more than what you went with.
I'm glad to know that we're off to a great start. This is the, as of yet, unnamed, I will insert the name here, podcast.
Truly a great name.
Amazing. Wonderful. Definitely didn't have to come up with that a week after we recorded this. This is your one-stop shop for all things competitive and at the common rarity. A brand new offering from the trademarked Hex Drinkers network of podcasts.
Yeah, so we're hoping to mainly touch on cpdh and pdc. Pauper Dual Commander and competitive, Pauper DH, and all the good things in between. We're trying to focus on everything competitive with this and not really going over sets like for the entirety of Pauper, but really trying to get the competitive angle and give people the insight they need from new sets, from decks in the database, from decks on the tier list, and let them level up their game at that competitive tier.
Yeah, exactly. We figured it was finally time for us to walk the walk. We have talked the talk about these competitive versions of Pauper for, over a year now. And we finally figured it was time for us to take the plunge, especially after such esteemed members of the community like the PDH pod have just gotten off to such a hot start. We figured we should bear that torch as well. Before we get into, what a wonderful show we have today, just a few things about kind of this venture going forward. Like we said, we want to cover all things competitive Pauper, but a few of the sorts of bits and segments that you can expect from us. We're going to be doing things like Deck of the Week, which Chev is actually going to give to us in just a second. We're going to be playing a lot more CPDH and a lot more PDC than we have been. We really want to keep up with the format, so we'll give you reports on decks that we've been brewing, what we've been playing, how it's been feeling, deck techs, whether that's from decks in the database, decks we've been brewing, or decks that we outsource from the community. Of course, as new submissions go into the database, all that stuff that you would get from those After Darks, we're going to be covering here. And most topically today, we will be doing set reviews as well. But let's hold off for that and let's get into our Deck of the Week. Chev, would you take it away?
Thank you. Yeah, so for this Deck of the Week idea, we really want to kind of give more in-depth analysis of decks that jump onto the database or show up on other places as well, but really kind of give you much more insight than maybe you can glean from the tags and the primer and the rest of the work that goes into it. So I have a relatively new one, but I think it's very potent and it's been making a lot of waves recently. And this is Abdel, Agent of the Iron Throne. Now, Abdel Adrian, Gorion's ward, is a legendary creature from Baldur's Gate that has choose a background. And what Abdel does is enters the battlefield. You can exile any number of other non-land permanents you control until they leave, so like O-Ring effect, and then create a 1/1 white soldier creature token for each permanent exiled this way. It's very easy to go infinite with Abdel. You just get 2 O-Ring effects. One exiles Abdel, and then the second one exiles the first one. And then you kind of go back and forth and use Abdel to exile the second one, etc. And then since the soldiers don't disappear with the permanents coming back, you get all kinds of flicker shenanigans and infinite number of creatures. So that's kind of the base, and that's just him before you even get to the background. And there are white-blue builds that focus more on the combo angle, and since they are the colors of flicker, and you can get just that inherent value of bringing Abdel back, exiling the same permanents, kind of getting that loop. And what Medwards has provided for us in the most recent database submission was the Abdel Adrian with Agent of the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne background is a black enchantment that gives commander creatures you own whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So you can get an idea that this is more of a mid-range, grindy version instead of just straight combo. We're trying to build a board of 1/1s and then have them just eat shit and cause our opponents to lose life on a regular basis. This deck does still run the O-Ring Faceless Butcher combo that I highlighted at the beginning. It also has a slightly more complicated Biblioplex Assistant, Cloud Shift, White Mana Rock, and then something that draws on ETB. A few more moving parts, but Assistant, when it enters the battlefield, get an instant or sorcery from your graveyard, put it on top of your library, and then you need to use that to get your Cloud Shift back, and then have a couple rocks. One that enters, you draw a card, And then you have the white rock that when you can come in, tap it, play Cloud Shift again, and kind of reuse that loop. So a much more complicated version of just exile creature, exile thing that exiles creature, and so on and so forth. So we are running both of those, but we are really trying to focus on that soldier synergy and kind of put opponents in a situation where they either get through and deal damage, or die and Agent of the Iron Throne deals damage to each opponent's face directly. So we are a little bit hindered on Agent of the Iron Throne being out, so do what you can to protect that if you're running this. We've got some really cool disruption pieces. One that's been coming up more recently is Suture Priest versus creature strategies. Suture Priest, whenever an opponent has a creature enter the battlefield, you can have that opponent lose 1 life. So, even against other Abdel decks, this is a great piece that you can run because when they're making their infinite soldiers, this makes sure that they die an infinite amount. So they probably won't run it. And it's good against
the meta tech.
Exactly. Any sort of Presence of God combo, any of that as well. And then Stave Off has also been showing up and a few times now as a way to give a creature protection from any color and use this to prevent things like Banishing Knack or Freed from the Real from kind of hitting a creature so an opponent can go infinite. So these are really cool pieces we see in here as well to complement the main strategy. Drawing a lot of cards, having a bunch of permanents out that you can exile with Abdel and come back with strong ETBs, and then kind of go from there. So we've got all the flicker that we can in mono white, and then the other like pseudo flicker of Feign Death, Supernatural Stamina, Undying Malice, where it's, if they would die, bring them back, and you can kind of get those same loops going. And the idea is you get Agent of the Iron Throne down as soon as possible, hopefully have a few rocks out by that point, and then when you drop Abdel, you can exile the rocks, make your first few soldiers, start the cycle, and then flicker as you either wait for the combo or slowly whittle down your opponent's life. Of the ones on the database, relatively straightforward. Mid-range is a very easy kind of way to jump in, and it does have that combo when you're looking for slightly different win con or kind of to get a little bit more aggressive with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was very thorough. Thank you, Chev. Yeah, we discussed this briefly in our most recent wave of database submissions, but I really appreciate the in-depth look. Every time I look at this deck, I'm giddy with how just like grindy and resilient it feels. Obviously, we're playing the Death by 1,000 Cuts game, but we just have so many ways to either protect, to get back, like you said, those black pseudo flicker effects, like Undying Malice. Like, yeah, go ahead, point your snuff out at Adrian, but like, I'm going to have him either way. And we're even running things like Omen of the Dead, Righteous Aura to make sure that we can either get our Adrian back, or Righteous Aura I think is a card that just more white, like basically every white deck needs to play, but this is just a way to like protect against anything really. Plus we're running like a bunch of, like I said, really grindy things. Like, have you ever seen Lantern of Revealing in a deck? Because, I mean, it's new from Baldur's Gate, but this is a 3-mana mana rock, adds a mana of any color. So, right, we're already on par there. But you can pay 4 if you just have a bunch of extra mana lying around. Tap it and look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, just put it on the battlefield tapped. And if you don't, you can put it on the bottom of your library. If you're like, I don't want that, just get it out of here.
Yeah.
This signals to me we are in this for the long haul. And we're going to, like I said, we are going to grind until the cows come home. It's just remarkable, honestly.
The couple things I want to highlight too, and again, huge shout out to M. Edwards for submitting this list.
I always read that as Medwards.
Medwards.
So,
It might be Medwards. I'm assuming that it's first initial.
Squidward's cousin.
Amazing deck. We were so glad to see it last time around. One of the things that I think is really cool too, of course, to not forget, is when you exile your rocks and then maybe Cloud Shift Abdel, those are all going to come in untapped. And so you can kind of have a instant speed, get a bunch of mana, and use it for something else too. So don't forget you kind of have that synergy to bring back the things you exile, and then they're going to be immediately available for use.
Yes, and you can of course, if you're doing that quote unquote infinite combo, ideally if you hit the infinite combo, you're going to win right there. But you can tap those for mana.
Yes.
In between each flicker, so you can also theoretically generate infinite mana if you had a mana sink somewhere in the deck, which I'm sure we have at least 1 or 2 in here. I'm just not seeing them right now.
Yeah.
So
there were 2 cards too that I think might be good in this build from Dominaria United. So I wanted to call them out real quick. You've got Phyrexian Vivisector, which granted is a little bit more conditional than Nefarious Imp, which I believe is in here. And Nefarious Imp is whenever 1 or more permanents you control leave the battlefield, scry 1. Phyrexian Vivisector, and we'll get into the Vivisector a little bit later, also is 2 mana, but it's whenever a creature you control dies. So if we're running Agent of the Iron Throne, this is just an additional sort of card to put in there to get more value off of your creatures dying. Make sure you're finding the pieces you need or additional rocks for Abdel to exile the next time around. And then the second one, this one was called out a lot by the PDH pals on Twitter as well, because I know they've been looking for a downshift. Meteorite. So Julian, I don't know if you remember how many of these dumb rocks we opened up in Magic Origins, I think, when we saw it for the first time.
Far too many. Far too many.
It's a 5 mana rock, taps for 1 of any color, so not good. But when it enters the battlefield, deal 2 damage, I believe, to any target. You pay more to put it down, but if you're going to be continuing to flicker Abdel, having that direct damage is going to be very nice in a deck where a lot of it is kind of keying off of those ETBs, even if you were just to flicker that rock itself. So something to keep in mind. 2 cards too if you're like trying to take this list and make it your own. Obviously you can slide in more than that, but those are 2 that I would be looking to see in this deck kind of going forward.
Yeah, I mean, once you have the infinite flicker combo, right, which is, you need a few cards to make it happen, but once you have that, like, Meteorite's a win condition, right?
Oh, yeah, spicy.
As opposed to having to have a sacrifice outlet to sacrifice creatures and trigger, proc the Iron Throne.
Just keep exiling your rock. No, that's great. All right, now I expect to see it.
I mean, I would need to look, and I would need to, like, write out all the lines and be like, okay, this line costs this much mana and requires this many cards, but I think there is a world in which that is like the quote-unquote most efficient play. And really, that's just wonderful. The fact that we're playing a format that is aimed at going fast, being super efficient, hyper-competitive, and Meteorite is the optimal win condition.
You can kill someone the way the dinosaurs went down.
Exactly. Jeez. Wow. Truly a stellar find there, Chev. I appreciate you bringing this light to the masses.
Our first deck of the week. We take bribes if you want your deck highlighted. If not, we will probably go through the database as our first source to kind of bring about all these decks, especially ones that kind of entered the database from its very inception, so ones that never really went through the whole process and were seen by the largest number of people. But we will also try to source decks from other places as well to kind of bring them more engagement in the community. So if you want your deck featured or one, reach out.
When Chev says we take bribes, I think that's his subtle way to plug that we have a Patreon. Patreon.com/hexdrinkers. Carry on. Now that we've hit our first deck of the week, I think we should hop into our main topic. And as I foreshadowed in the beginning, we're doing a set review of Dominaria United. It actually just pre-released a couple days ago as of recording this, and probably just released a couple days ago as of this being released. I think it's only fitting that we are starting this with the return to the set that kicked off the Uncommon Legend boon and kind of, the set that gave us such format tyrants as things like Tatiova and stuff, and really kind of revolutionized the way we have commanders in PDH and in cpdh especially. What are we working with here? What's procked our interest?
So when we say a set review too, we're not trying to tread the same ground that the PDH pals and the PDH podcast have done prior to this. We're going to be focusing specifically on the top cards we think are competitive, and then where we think they would go, certain information about them. But this is going to be a very, precise, like, these are the cards you're going to want to try in competitive, and not so much every common that's in the set.
Yes, we do not nearly have the patience for a card-by-card set review. We're not doing anything like such greats as the PDH pod and limited resources have done before us. This is merely 5 from Chev, 5 from me, and then a few uncommons that you might want to helm your decks.
So kind of jumping in right off the bat, this is one of the cards that I was most excited to see once I kind of put my mind to it. Domain gets a little bit of a bad rap. The effects are usually relatively small. I'm assuming it's for, constructed or maybe limited, but the benefit you usually get from having those land types is not that large. There are a few where that benefit really picks up, and this I think is one of them. And the card is Shadow Prophecy. It's a 2 and a black for an instant. Domain, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. Put up to 2 of them into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. You lose 2 life. So, right off the bat, if you're in a 2-color deck, this is just an additional Blood Pact. That was a card we saw also very recently. 3 mana instant, draw 2, lose 2. That, we know, is in 6 decks currently in the database. So, also, I want to shout out to Corey from the Dark Confidants, who one of the scripts he runs, if you guys listen to the episode of the PDH podcast, where we go into kind of how the database works and how it's structured by all this data that we can accumulate from what's in it, what people are submitting, etc. One of the things that we keep track of is how many times certain cards appear across all the decks. And that's a resource we started to use to kind of look at some of this. Blood Pact is in 6 decks. This is just another edition of that effect, and in colors like black-white, where you don't have a lot of good draw, and especially good instant draw, this is a slam dunk. While there aren't any 3-color decks yet where blue is not there in addition to black, if we get one of those, like maybe an Abzan, Mardu, anything like that, it skyrockets in value, where now you're looking at the top 3, you're probably putting something in your yard that you can get back later, and you're putting 2 of those into your hand. And so, throw this in a Fusion Elemental non-competitive list too, and it'll be fantastic. But this, I think, is a really good instant draw that we should see a lot of in coming 2-color black decks where blue is not an option for your card advantage.
Like we said, the 3 mana instant or even sorcery speed, draw 2, lose 2 in black, it has just become like such a staple in all aspects of Pauper formats, and even in CPDH. Just having that extra redundancy is nice, especially at instant speed. But I think the interesting thing really comes when you get to play 3 and even more color decks. Now, obviously, we don't have any 4 or 5 color uncommons to work with yet. Always trust in Fire design philosophy.
Are you discounting Fusion Elemental and Composite Golem and Transguild Courier? We don't have any competitive lists with them yet. But
I was going to say I am very much discounting them because they're not good. But yeah, I think being able to play this in like you said, a 3-color deck, probably something like an Abzan. I would have to look at what our options are now, but I'm sure we'll get a playable one in the future. Being able to also just bin that 3rd card is very good for other decks. Even if you have to fire this off on like a dual land and 2 islands in your blue-black deck, being able to bin 2 cards is still fine. The consistency, the redundancy that this offers, and of course, that's not including any sort of incidental synergies with putting things in the graveyard. This is just, it's one of those bread and butter things that you're like, yes, this will just have a home, right?
Don't immediately discount it because it has domain. Actually, look through what that text is doing because it is pretty potent. And also, while we're here talking about domain, honorary shout out to the new 10 dual-typed lands we have. They're good because in green-based decks, because you can tutor them and all that stuff. But in any deck that is now using domain or cares about that, they work beautifully with, obviously, Shadow Prophecy and will go in any probably PDH deck alongside the snow ones we got with Call Time.
Basically, every tapped duel from here to the end of time will be able to be included in PDH decks.
Correct.
In CPDH, we're a little bit more picky, but if you're playing a mid-rangey sort of deck, or especially if you're playing any sort of 3-color deck, which they're starting to trickle into the database.
Yeah,
I believe
getting
we
a
have
few more.
4 or 5 of them now. Those are good pickups. And yeah, I did a search because I was like, oh, please tell me we can search these somehow. And if you are playing a green deck, which admittedly we believe is the weakest color in CPDH, but if you're playing a deck that has green in it and you're running Sky Shroud Claim or Wood Elves for whatever reason, you can search these.
Yeah.
So bada bing, bada boom. I think that's it, right? If you're playing a 3-color deck
sure.
and you go true. If you're playing a 3-color deck and you can Sky Shroud Claim for 2 of these, I think that's the dream.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. You can pretend you're playing EDH.
Yes. Exactly. I got my 2 fucking Shocklands and I'm good to go. But yeah. Obviously, new dual lands are great, and eventually, I promise you, eventually we will have ways to search common dual lands in PDH.
100%.
Give it another year.
Yeah.
Give it another year.
Common fetches when maybe the slow fetches. I think they're common rarity.
Those could definitely get reprinted at. Oh wait, hold up. All right, I gotta check. Please tell me those aren't at common rarity already. Right?
No, they're.
I think they're only uncommon.
They most certainly are not.
All right, good. I didn't think they were, but I didn't look too hard at the downshifts for Baldur's Gate. Actually, yes, we did. Never mind.
Yeah, we did. We did for Baldur's Gate,
and
slow fetches were. I think all of them were reprinted in the 5-color commander deck for this one. We're getting a little off topic, so we should steer back. But yeah, I think they were all uncommons. Yeah.
Chev, anything else you wanted to mention about Shadow Prophecy?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Play it in any deck that is black and. Probably not black and blue. There are probably better options. But it can still, as Julian said, have use for putting things in the bin on purpose. Another Blood Pact is a great thing to have in the format. Also better name.
You know what else is... You know what else is another better, good redundancy thing to have in the format? Talarian Terror. Now, I talked about this. I mentioned this on Twitter briefly. The amount of disrespect that Wizards has been putting on my boy Cryptic Serpent's name in the past few months has been just really, really offensive. Like, obviously, we had the whole, Sailor's Bane came through, took the crown.
Yep.
That is now in the database, right?
Just ate the Cryptic Serpent.
It's too powerful for me to ignore. But Talarian Terror, a 6 and a blue serpent, 5/5 that costs 1 less for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard with Ward 2. This is still basically just better than Cryptic Serpent, and I'm kind of mad. Now, it's coming in at common, right? So you're not going to be able to play this as your commander, but twofold. One, if you're playing a Sailor's Bane deck, or you're playing a, God forbid you haven't switched over from Cryptic Serpent, bless your soul, but maybe you might want to. This is just redundancy in that deck, right? Like, somehow, if they get your Sailor's Bane, now you have this to back it up, or you just might have 2.
Right.
Which is good. It also is one of the biggest weaknesses of those 2 decks, in that style of deck in particular, is Edicts. Having another creature that you can sacrifice, we're running things like Archaeomancer generally, we're running things like Mnemonic Wall occasionally, just to sacrifice. This is just another thing. It's generally going to come down for like 2 mana. It has built-in protection, so it's hard to get rid of. It can just block for days, and that's strictly in those decks. There are like, probably 2/3 of the decks in the database, and in the format in general, are running blue in some capacity.
Correct.
Talk about just another fat threat in a Crackling Drake deck, in a Ghost of Pietro Plus deck, right? This is just another thing that's going to generally come down super cheap. It's protected. It blocks literally everything in the format as a 5/5, except for Sailor's Bane, but you're playing it in the Sailor's Bane deck. We've reached the point where we're starting to hit critical mass on a lot of these specific types of cards, right? Like, that's just a good addition for a lot of decks, especially since so many decks are playing blue and so many decks are playing a lot of cheap instants and sorceries that are going to make this cost literally 2 mana.
Yeah, having good, strong backup creatures in blue is something that, some do exist, but a giant butt on the field while you get together your Banishing Knack combo, or you're freed from the reel, having some way to keep your opponents off of you is going to be very important. The one thing I do want to call out with Crackling Drake and Sailor's Bane is just make sure you remember that with those, they don't care if the spell is an exile, right? Whereas Talarian Terror does. This will be something that I see as just like throwing into your deck. The number of times it will matter, especially with one of those guys at the helm. Your opponents are going to be less likely to just exile your graveyard. They probably still will, but the need that we saw with Cryptic Serpent to exile the graveyard, because that just renders the commander obsolete, is not there as much. So maybe that balance of them less likely to do it means this card will be stronger. Either way, keep an eye on that, because if you just treasure cruise and then try to play Talarian Terror, you might realize you made an oopsie. All right, any last words for Talarian Terror, Julian?
No, I've said all I needed to.
Big butts.
No justice, no peace for my boy Cryptic Serpent.
So jumping on to my next pick, it's something I kind of foreshadowed above in our deck of the week. That synergy was obviously intentional. Phyrexian Vivisector. 2 mana for a 2/2 Phyrexian human. Whenever a creature you control dies, scry 1. So it's a cheap card advantage trigger. It's going to be really nice with 2 new commanders we're getting. Ellis Ilkor, which is just the ultimate aristocrats commander, and Aaron, Capshin or something. But that guy...
Aaron?
Yeah, Aaron. I think it's only 1A. Yeah, but he got Phyrexianized or something and is the dad of some other characters in the lore. Anyway, Aaron is like 3 mana, sacrifice a creature, put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. Busted, amazing, going to be super cool. This is an obvious win for that deck, and decks that really just care about creatures dying. I can see this in Mayhem Devil. I can see this, obviously, as said above, in Abdel. Another really good bread and butter card. It gives you that card advantage in a color that, as we mentioned with, Shadow Prophecy, black doesn't have a lot of amazing options to kind of like filter through your deck if you don't have blue. So I see this more in decks that don't have access to blue for just actual card draw. Here we're just scrying, but I think this is a very powerful piece in decks that care about creature death. Just remember, it's that creatures you control die, not any creature.
I think another important thing about this is that, like you said, we're starting to hit critical mass in terms of like our aristocrat decks being close to like what actual,
Yes. Yeah.
EDH aristocrat decks are looking like. But, the thing is, a lot of our black-white decks in here have that aristocrat slant, but they're also usually combo decks. So we don't necessarily need to be drawing a bunch of cards as long as we can just filter, like you said, to the ones that we actually care about.
Exactly.
We can scry 12 as long as we get to the one piece that we need. And I think this is going to be one of the best options, at least for now, to make that happen.
Yeah. And especially when, you're trying to filter through your deck, deal damage to get to your meteorite win con. That's right. This is a callback.
True.
That's how well we planned this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have, no one has a Fabricate in this format yet, but
we
definitely don't have Fabricate if we're not in blue, so got to just scry to it.
Phyrexian Vivisector, good card. That's all I got to say.
I want to talk about another good card, and this provides a similar sort of card selection. I want to talk about Academy Wall.
Ooh. Now,
as I was looking through we got about 100 new commons in this set.
I think 87 specifically.
Somebody can read. I kept like looking at Academy Wall and I was like, maybe. And then eventually, I don't know if I talked myself into it, but I'm gonna try and present as good a case that this is a pretty good card. So this is a 2 and a blue for a wall. It's a defender and it's an 0/5. So first off, let's just talk about this, right? 3 mana is fine, whatever. We can pay that all day, and it's an 0/5, right? So like I said, this shuts down a lot of things coming in, right? We don't have a lot of like super huge creatures in the format. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Now, obviously, this ability triggers only once each turn is a new rider that they've been putting on cards because they don't want us to have any fun. But that's fine because this triggers off instant. So we have 4 players' turns to, trigger off. We can do that.
Yeah.
This being just kind of like a recurrent card advantage source in a lot of decks that just want to be casting instants and sorceries, right? I talked about a lot of the blue back decks, basically every single red-blue deck. We're going to just be casting things, whether it's to get into the graveyard to make sure that our Sailor's Bane costs cheaper, whether it's to put in the graveyard or whatever because we want Crackling Drake to be huge, whether we're just discarding cards because, toast things.
Right.
This is just going to be drawing us cards. It puts things in the graveyard as well, which is, there's also synergy there. But the way this kind of functions just as basically like an enchantment, right? Like a build your own... build your own Ristic Study is kind of generous, but I almost see it functioning similar to how red blue decks play a lot of the cards that say whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, like deal a damage or
correct,
whatever, the gutter style card. This just being able to filter through to get to our combo pieces. Maybe we're running High Tide Lines. Maybe we're running Blink things and we just need to get to our Ghostly Flickers, or maybe we need to fill our graveyard. This is just another kind of piece that holds down the fort and allows us to get to that endpoint, provides a lot of incremental card advantage. I'll let other expert members of the community weigh in, but I think this might be an underrated card, and I think it's definitely something that deserves inclusion in blue decks in the format.
No, I totally agree, and I'm really glad you brought up the things like Crackling Drake, where we're really, or I keep wanting to say Cryptic Serpent, but I mean Sailor's Bane. Yeah. And being able to kind of fill the yard off of those spells. Granted, you probably want to be casting them before they go to the yard, but still having that ability to kind of, at instant speed, grow your commander is going to be super powerful. And then, of course, with Ghost, where it literally cares about discard, this is a great pickup. And I also don't think it'll be the first target your opponents look at when dealing with removal spells. It's not going to fall to any of the, mass removal, deal 2 damage to everything, because it is an 0/5. So it would have to be specifically targeted. And for it to be the thing that kind of I'm going to spend time on, as opposed to like the threat itself, like Crackling Drake, it's probably just going to sit there and accrue value for most of the game.
And also, this is, once again, edicts are more sort of a, your personal meta sort of consideration. But once again, this is just going to sit there, and then they're going to be like Chainer's Edict, and you're going to be like, yup, sack my Academy Wall, attack you for another 9. Like,
yeah.
All right, what do you got next, Chev?
My next pick, kind of continuing my vein of just functional good cards that kind of help smooth a cpdh deck to get from a 9 to a 10, and that's Keldon Strike Team. So much more situational than I think the last two, where really any deck with black is going to want to play the Vivisector or Shadow Prophecy for that value. Keldon Strike Team is a little bit more specific, and it's 2 in a red for a 3/1 human warrior and kicker for 1 in a white. When Keldon Strike Team enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 2 1/1 white soldier tokens. As long as Keldon Strike Team entered the battlefield this turn, creatures you control have haste. Okay, so 3 mana, enters the battlefield, all creatures have haste. I'm ignoring the soldiers are cool, but we're here to do broken stuff most likely, and that is for 3 mana. We can cast this, and then with all our other stuff. And very specifically, this brings to mind the Rocco Cabaretti Caterer deck that got entered into the database last time as well. We covered that on our database episode of After Dark. But one of the key cards in that deck is Tuk Tuk Rubblefort. A 3 mana, creatures you control have haste. And it was very specifically so we can set up our Presence of God combos at instant speed before anyone has time to respond. Having another Tuk Tuk Rubblefort is fantastic. And it does fit in the colors of Naya. There aren't going to be a ton of decks that are looking for this sort of like specific 3 mana haste enabler, but I think any deck that can benefit from having a large mass of creatures in Boros Plus should take a look at this card.
I mean, I also think that you said you were going to ignore the 2 one-way white soldier creature tokens, but I mean, paying 5 mana for 3 bodies, you don't want to be doing that, but it's a nice safety valve for, oh dear lord, I need to not die. And if not dying for a turn allows you to either thwart somebody else or get to your combo, that's fine.
Yes.
But like you said, yeah, the combo potential, especially for decks like that Rocco deck, is powerful. We've been talking about it all pod, but this redundancy is really making a lot of these decks hum.
It makes a deck more than just like, I have a line that can exist, and the rest of my deck is focused on making sure that single line happens. And we're seeing the development to where I can now have multiple lines, multiple targets, and it becomes faster paced as a game format, and also more challenging to pilot the deck, which I think is what we're kind of expecting as decks increase in speed. They're also going to increase slightly in complexity, and we will see a large divergence between PDH and cpdh. So that's really what all these new cards are doing. They're really smoothing the curves that exist for cpdh decks. What do we got next from you?
Well, you know, Chev, I think I'll stick on your theme of getting aggressive. I've got a pick that is a bit more speculative, but I want to talk about.
You're feeling a little speculative today.
I've been feeling a little speculative. We'll get there even further. I got even more one, but I want to talk about Best Boy Bog Badger.
Best Boy.
Say
Bog
that
Badger.
5 times fast. This is 2 and a green for a Badger, a 3/3. That's fine, but really what we care about is his kicker for a singular black mana. When he enters the battlefield, if Bog Badger was kicked, creatures you control gain menace until end of turn. So currently there are only 2 decks on the database that are black-green, strictly black-green, no 3 colors. One is a Dina Soul Steeper, and one is a Witherbloom Apprentice. Now, Witherbloom Apprentice, we have seen in action. That's more of a Death by a Thousand Cuts style sort of thing, and Dina Soul Steeper is leaning towards that combo aristocrat sort of thing, but just in Golgari. Specifically, if there is a ever a chance for a Elf Ball style deck, I'm thinking Herald, something of Skemfar, or even like Abomination of Llanowar. If we can ever reach that, which I think if we put enough of the collective brain power into that, I think we can make a Golgari Elf Ball deck competitive. If that ever becomes viable, having an easy way, 4 mana, right? The kicker is only a singular black mana. If we can ever do that and give all of our creatures menace, that's huge. I think that could be a win con. That's like, to me, and maybe I'm getting a little grandiose here, but that is like our Triumph of the Hordes.
Yeah, it's super strong. And we have a couple of those effects in Dominaria United. Another one, I'll probably call it a little bit later as well, Heroic Charge. It's an instant. I think it's like 3 or 4... it's like 2 white and 2 instant creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Kicker for I think red and 1, but then those creatures get trample. And so we haven't seen a lot previously cards that apply an effect to all creatures you control at common. And so getting our overruns, getting our Triumph of the Hordes, and our Crater Hoofs, those effects have been missing and might really unlock some aggro strategies. You said if we get in an elf deck, of course, Julian, you're forgetting about our other central tenant here on the currently unnamed competitive Pauper podcast, and that is PDC.
Of course.
In our After Dark, where we kind of talked about Pauper Dual Commander, I ran an elf deck. We saw that there was another more aggressive elf deck that existed with Abomination of Llanowar at the front that already has menace, but is still an elf ball in every way. Bog Badger would be amazing in those builds, giving your elves a way to get through. and in a format where there are already big elf decks. I have no doubt we'll eventually get a solid elf deck in cpdh, but don't sleep on Bog Badger for that other 100-card format we follow. But I really like Bog Badger. It's something that I was definitely keeping an eye on too. And then any of those Anthem to apply to all your creatures is worth looking at for the 2 color combinations that they exist in.
Yeah, I think a lot of these sort of cards are definitely worth a reconsideration. We mentioned in our previous episode that the format is certainly shifting a lot more towards aggro decks being viable. That's strictly for CPDH. Yeah, if we're talking PDC, then yes, this is huge for those sort of things, and then of course, being able to play something like a Shaman of the Pack there.
Yeah,
you can hit him with the 1-2 punch. But we will talk more about PDC in further episodes. But Chev, I couldn't help notice that you also have a Golgari card on your list. Let's rise up. Rise up, Black Green Gang.
We're trying to make Golgari work. While there are some strategies, and kind of as Julian mentioned, with only 2, neither of them really win through creatures besides their commander. Because the commanders are so powerful, Dina and Witherbloom, they don't need a whole lot of stuff from the 99 as far as, creatures are concerned. But in time when that changes, obviously when Bog Badger becomes a staple and bannable card due to its just sheer powerfulness, Best Badger, or Best Boy Badger, if, it dies and you want to bring it around again, Urborg Repossession might be for you. A 1-mana black sorcery with kicker 1 and a green. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. You gain 2 life. If this spell was kicked, return another target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. We already have a ton of effects at black, sorcery, 1 mana, return creature card from graveyard to hand. Not a lot of these are currently being played in CPDH. There are very few other ones that, again, like I mentioned, are recurring these creatures. But I think, once we get there, that effect to get 1 or pay 3 mana and get 2 cards back, one of which doesn't have to be a creature, is super, super good. Better than Druidic Ritual, which I think we saw in Baldur's Gate. That's like mill 3 and then return a creature and a land specifically. So it's more open than that. Soul Salvage, I think it's just 3 mana, return 2 creatures. But it's too generic, so it can work in just a mono black deck. But that's not seeing play in any deck. So it's better than those in the Golgari colors. The only card it currently would be up against in a deck where you're caring about recursion might be Survivor's Bond. That's from Ikoria. It's a 2-mana green sorcery that's return a non-human creature and return a human creature. So if your deck can make that work, it's a little better costed, but I think for every other case, you're going to want to run Repossession. And this is probably my most speculative pick, where, we don't have the deck for it yet, but this is something that we'll be coming back to on a later episode and be like, we covered it first because we're awesome.
I think this card is awesome. I think 3 mana to get, and it's not like this is just 3 mana draw 2. Mm-hmm. This is 3 mana draw 2 cards that you want and are good cards, right?
Right.
You could get crap off the top depending on how your deck has been shuffled, but this is like no, these are cards that I want, and they've probably been good enough that someone has removed them.
Yes,
and I will now get them back for 3 mana. The fact that it doesn't get only creatures is huge too. There's plenty of crazy enchantments, artifacts, whatever that we can get back. And I think really the biggest thing holding this back is that there's just not a lot of Golgari strategies. If this was 2 and a black, this would see play immediately.
Soul Salvage is that card. It is 2 creatures. But that has not seen much attention. Maybe it should be reevaluated in the current one, or maybe the permanent clause makes this more useful. We mentioned that Dina doesn't really care about creatures, but even if you're paying the 1 black for this, it's return a creature and gain 2 life, which procs Dina. So it could also be a consideration for those strategies.
I really do think that permanent clause is huge here.
Yes.
I'm just thinking if we had a Sultai commander.
Yeah, ooh, that would be beautiful.
And you could run this to get back something like a Freed from the Real. Now obviously those are blue cards, so now we're jumping through extra hurdles here.
Yes.
But I think there's real potential here, and I think we just have not unlocked the right Golgari commander. I talked about my Golgari card, but that's my quota for the episode. I'm going to go back to talking about blue cards. This is actually something that you turned my attention toward, Chev. This is a Impede Momentum. Now, Impede Momentum is a 1 and a blue for a sorcery. Tap target creature and put 3 stun counters on it, and then scry 1. Now, as I kind of thought through this, it's a little bit more niche and a bit more of a meta sort of consideration than I thought, but I think there's a lot of implications for this stuff, right? So we're tapping target creature. We're essentially locking a creature down for 3 untap steps, which is, that's a good chunk of a game, right? How long do games last? 10 turns, 12 turns maybe?
Right.
Let's see, so, a quarter of a game. I think the huge thing is that there's so many combo decks in the format that are reliant on creatures tapping. Thinking Ley and Lore Weaver, some variants of Malcolm combos rely on tapping. Things like Quicksilver Dagger, Viridian Longbow. There's things like Parcel Beast. There's an Araumi deck, the mill and reanimate sort of stuff. Being able to lock those down from activating, Cormella is another one that we just got, is huge. Also, this can lock down anything that needs to attack. Any Armix deck, Crackling Drake, Sailor's Bane, we've talked about them enough this episode, but being able to lock those down, obviously you have to get through ward on some of our things, right? Protection, but being able to lock those down is huge. The thing that makes this not immediately a shoo-in, obviously, is the meta considerations. If you're not playing against any of these sort of decks, if you're playing like an only aggro meta, it's not as relevant.
Yeah.
But the thing is, unfortunately, there's a bunch of options in our format for the combos that untap these forcibly, right? Things like Freed from the Real, things like, we have a Pure Sight Marrow deck in the database that it literally has the untap ability. Even though I love this card, I think it can really cripple a lot of those decks and give you a lot of good time to either get your own combo off or just, kind of nullify those while you're doing your own thing. The unfortunate thing is that there are a lot of untap abilities, so it's going to be a lot more contingent on how you can play around those or just what other people you're playing with running. But I still think it's an include that a lot of people should consider, even just for who's the new Bant like double striker guy from New Capenna. We got the Disciplined Duelist. Even if you just need to lock down a Disciplined Duelist, this is something that's really good about it. And since it doesn't technically remove them from the battlefield, it's not like they're just gonna replay it again. No, it's just kind of stuck there. And generally, a lot of Voltron decks and stuff are not running Sacrifice Outlets.
So a couple points here, and maybe we need to get our favorite pauper judge on here to rule. But stun counters, if a permanent with a stun counter would become untapped, remove one from it instead. So I'm very interested to see how this plays with things that do have the untap ability. Like, if you pay it and you go to use the ability, do you just remove a stun counter? Like, is it a replacement effect?
Wow. So, God, reading cards is actually amazing. I just kind of shortcutted into my head the stun counter.
Right, that it only is the untap step. Yeah.
Yes. But you're right.
I think there's some added utility here. I was going to say something like, if you're in a color where better removal exists, maybe you don't want to consider this at first unless it's for the meta. Keeping a creature down for 3 turns is better than removing it, and then it can be replayed because the thing you're probably tapping down is a commander. I almost see this as like a mini oubliette. Or that one card we got from Modern Horizons 2 that's like exile something with 2 suspend counters on it.
Yeah.
So this kind of deals with that. But if it also deals with any untapping, I think that gives it, a plus 0.5, right? Where if you can't untap it with a random effect or another creature or itself, maybe you can get out of like a turn of it, but you're still paying the mana for the untap ability. And there's 2 more of those you have to deal with.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, I think it's still a situational sort of card, but it definitely goes up a bunch. So yeah, good call there. Amazing what happens when you read the reminder text on what a stun counter is.
I mean, they are brand new, so they
true.
And I'm very glad they exist. Like when we heard we were getting another evergreen counter, I assumed it would be of an ability we already had. It really cleans up a lot of cards that are like, when this enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls, doesn't untap in their next untap step. And you're like, okay, now we can just say ETB, put a stun counter. We even talked about it on our last regular podcast about discussing one of the custom legends that you created, where instead of, having a bunch of extra unruly untap text, you can just deal with that. So very excited to see where they go from here. I'm sure we'll see a lot more and learn to hate it, but for now, Impede Momentum seems like a pretty solid pickup. Jumping to my own blue card, and something that I think specifically will not work if a card has sun counters on it, Shore Up. 1 blue, instant, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn. Untap it. Again, call out to Corey for maintaining the list that shows how prolific certain cards are across the database. Dive Down is a classic piece, gives a creature hexproof +0/+3. That's in 12 decks. Mizium skin, a little bit more, can be applied to multiple creatures. That's in 13. So Shore Up clearly has a place for it, either as replacing one of those or in addition to Yalaron. I see you already added it to your Parcel Beast list. That was the first one that I was thinking of for Shore Up where that could come in handy. Look up the list, and I'm immediately drawn to the one card with the little red exclamation point to it on Moxfield, so glad to see you recognizing the value. It's very clear that this is a super powerful card. It can enable things like Around Me to get an additional go-around. Basically everything that Julian mentioned, Impede Momentum tries to stop. Shore Up gives you the ability to fix for activated abilities, or, a surprise blocking Crackling Drake, which I think most people would be very upset to see. Very good utility card, protects your best creature, or lets you get in with an additional activated ability on something like Lore Weaver, Around Me, etc., etc.
I mean, I think you said pretty much everything that needs to be said. A singular mana card in the best color in the format that protects your most valuable asset, aka your commander, is just going to be an auto include. I think if we took all 10 of our cards, this is like number one of just like, yes.
This is just like, oh yeah, I got to find a slot. Like this is going in.
Literally when we saw this revealed, like midway through spoiler season, we were just like, oh, well, there's a cpdh staple. Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Carry on.
I actually think this might have been one of the cards that was dumped. I think a couple of my picks here, I think both Shadow Prophecy and Shore Up were just kind of thrown in that like final common dump we get the Friday before pre-release. Don't quote me on that, but I believe when I was kind of digging through and those showed up, I called out Shore Up in a Twitter thread kind of highlighting the best of the rest. And I think even Keldon Strike Team was part of that group. Cards with abilities that seemed like so innocuous in every other format, but are kind of the bread and butter of CPDH.
I know. I still need to get used to the vomiting of 70 cards at the end of spoiler season, because I'm always like entranced in the beginning. I'm like, oh, what do we got?
Yeah,
and then
flashy mythic.
Yeah, after a few days, I'm just like, I'm already worn out from spoiler season again. And then they're like, oh yeah, by the way, here's the rest of the set and all the cards that you care about for Pauper.
All right, I think that's it for my picks. So if we're counting, Julian, you should only have one more card, correct?
You're right. There should only be one more card, but Chev, this is a podcast with me on it, so we all know that I had to cheat, right? So I actually have two more cards. One, because one is a card that I thought was going to be really good, and then I looked and I was like, maybe it's not as good as I thought. And the other one is once again a speculative pick. So let me talk briefly about Battle Rage Blessing. 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature gains Death Touch and Indestructible until end of turn. Now, at first I thought this was our first real instance of Indestructible in black. That's not true. There's 5 or 6 other cards that give Indestructible in some form. But I do think that this is just kind of like an underrated sort of thing. I need to further peruse the document that Corey produced and kind of see if those other cards are in there. But I think for a lot of decks, especially mono black decks, this is kind of your best quote unquote form of protection. And I think of all the additional buffs that some of them give, one of them is +2/+0, one of them is lifelink, one is some other weird condition, draw a card. I think the Death Touch and Indestructible is probably one of the better ones. Yes. So once again, having this redundancy, having this ability to not only protect something but also take something out in the meantime, I think is pretty good. I think that this should see niche play depending on kind of how things are going, but I think it's something that at least we should draw attention to.
I think from the aspect of, this is you're protecting your creature that's in combat, but you'll make sure to take someone else down with it. And also just the two keywords together, almost look at it like a modal card. You're probably going to be using it to protect your best asset, Death Touch conditionally, but you could also throw it on something like Mayhem Devil or another card that is going to ping multiple things in a single turn and use that Death Touch to just murder multiple larger threats.
Gotta say, 2 mana can be searched for with Transmute, so that's a good call. I did not think about the maybe I actually just care about having Death Touch because I'm going to be nuking the field. But my final pick and my other speculative pick is another 2 mana card, but this one's in green. We've mentioned it before, and it will not be the last time. But we've got some feelings about green over here on the as of yet unnamed competitive Pauper podcast. Bite Down is an instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. Now, this is not a new effect. We have cards like this. We have things like Ram Through. We have things like, I believe Prey Upon is a similar thing. This is speculative because we only have currently one mono green list in the database. It's a Temur Sabertooth list, which is basically wins off of a combo. Like I said, even though green is kind of the weakest color in PDH, I think with the way the meta's been shifting, being more hospitable to aggro decks, and the way that cards are being designed and printed, in that things are just being pushed, I think it's only a matter of time until we can get a legitimate mono green aggro or mono green Voltron strategy.
Yeah.
Think Cryptic Serpent but green. I think it's very possible. Or do sort of like a more swarmy style mono green aggro. If that becomes the case, one of the big important parts of that deck is going to be how many efficient, good, they're not fight cards, but whatever we're just dealing damage equal to our power to another creature. However many of those cards we have, I think is going to be an important part of the deck, and maybe even the make or break part, just because can we get rid of, at instant speed here, potentially someone who's going to try and combo off? Can we get rid of large blockers? Can we get rid of death touch blockers? Because we need to get through with probably just a huge trampling creature. I'm going to speculate, say Bite Down is something that people should take note of. I think we have like 3 or 4 of these in, right where we want to be. So when we get that inevitable mono green aggro or Voltron deck, this is a card that you're going to want to include in that deck. So I had to cheat, but I think it was for a good cause. I was looking for the future. I'm trying to pass the torch.
When green becomes good, we'll be ready with all the picks, specifically with Golgari. But it's funny.
We'll be ready with all the hate, because honestly, I'm surprised that the way green has looked in several other formats over the past few years now.
Yeah, it's still a safe haven from green dominance. I mean, what's that giant ape that we have at Mythic this time? It's like whenever you cast a creature spell, like
do one of a million
destroy
things,
something,
because
do whatever abilities Questing Beast didn't. We're gonna fill out the cycle.
Yeah, literally do whatever you want. That's how I see every green rare in Mythic. It's just like whenever you do anything, do whatever else you want.
We still have, some reasonable green cards down here in the commons, but I think that wraps up our top common picks or the top cards to put into your 99 from Dominaria United. But kind of shifting gears a little bit, let's talk briefly about some of the cards that we expect to see as powerful commanders from Dominaria United. What are some either legendaries or just regular uncommon creatures? I don't think we actually picked any regular uncommon creatures, given that this is a Dominaria set. All the good ones were legendary anyway. What are some that you think might be powerful decks going forward and might even make it into the database?
True. Yeah, there are uncommons in this set. As there are in
most sets, will someone say.
Yeah, I think I just want to throw out 2 quick ones, because they're basically going to be kind of like color-shifted versions of things that we've already seen in the metagame. First, I want to talk about Tura Kennerlied Sky Knight, and I'm sorry for all of our German listeners, I've completely butchered that name. The Sky Knight is 2, a white and double blue for a human knight with flying. It's a 3/3. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. I'm seeing this kind of as an alternate to the Murmuring Mystic deck that we already have in the format. Obviously, Murmuring Mystic is much easier to cast, right? Only 1 color, more generic to work with. It's a mana, cheaper. It makes flying tokens, but it's only a 1/5. So I think there's some trade-offs here, right? It's a similar sort of strategy where you want to swarm the board with tokens.
Correct.
Obviously, Tura can get in on their own. They have flying. You have access to a lot of powerful white cards, things like protection, things like Oblivion Ring effects,
removal,
blink effects as well. I think it's kind of a trade-off, but it's going to function in a similar way, just in the fact that, once again, we're slinging a lot of spells. We're going to be swarming the board, death by 1,000 cuts. I know this isn't True Bird Gang. Ryan, don't come after me, but this is an option that you could get into. And then Ryan, don't come after me part 2. Somehow these are both his decks. But Rona, Sheoldred's Faithful, is a 1, a blue, and then double black for a legendary creature human wizard, a 3/4. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 1 life. This is the Magecraft ability off of Witherbloom Apprentice. As well, Rona can be cast from the graveyard by discarding 2 cards in addition to paying its other costs. So we're trading the 2 mana Witherbloom Apprentice for a 4 mana Rona, but we can cast from the graveyard, kind of negating that sort of commander's tax. We're getting that, once again, that death by 1,000 cuts, but via slinging spells. But I would argue in best color pair in the format, blue-black, we're just playing better spells in general overall, I would say. In addition, discarding cards to the graveyard in blue-black is generally been fine, whether it's graveyard synergies, whether it's madness, whether it's whatever. I think Rona is going to be a formidable commander and in that sort of a Witherbloom Apprentice style deck. So
yeah, costs a little bit more up front, but with the ability to add madness cards, specifically the one that like costs 0 to return a creature from your graveyard, madness 0, I mean, or the destroy creatures on ETB. I've been excited and interested in a madness blue-black commander for CPDH, and Rona might have what it takes. It'll be interesting to see how quickly can it come down and establish a presence, and then especially with like you can gain value off of them in the yard, it is a pretty potent combo.
It's also a lot easier for this as well to obviously run proper I win the game combos, as opposed to the Wither Chad who is in Golgari, who's just I'm just doing
whatever
the thing,
works.
the mid-range grind. Yeah, exactly. So there's trade-offs here, but you have looked at Witherbloom Apprentice and you've been like, I could see myself playing that, or it's almost where I want it to be. I think Rona is going to be a nice color shift on that strategy.
Also, a shout out to this much improved Rona from the one we saw in the original Dominaria. It was like Rona.
Oh my god, it was so bad.
Of Gix. That was painful in terms of what it did.
I know I mentioned in the beginning, like, original Dominaria, like the original uncommon legends. They had like Tatiova and stuff. They also had a bunch of really freaking bad legends too.
There were some less than spicy ones. And then I think this must be the whole uncommon legend cycle where it's like 1 pip of one color, 2 of another. Because I realized that that's both of mine as well. Starting with Garna, Bloodfist of Keld, another honestly cooler upgraded version of what we saw in OG Dominaria, or not OG, but 2018 Dominaria. 1 black and 2 red for a human berserker, 4/3. Whenever another creature you control dies, draw a card if it was attacking. Otherwise, Garna, Bloodfist of Keld deals 1 damage to each opponent. So I think, again, we're going up against a similar deck. Mayhem Devil would probably be the easiest to compare. That one is
another freaking Ryan deck. What the hell?
Whenever someone sacks a permanent, deal 1 damage, I believe, to any target, and then something else. You're losing a little bit on the ability to target anything, but I think you're making up for that with a strong commander that gives you card draw in red-black, which are not the colors you normally get card draw. And so you're probably doing a little bit more with tokens, a little bit more aggro. You're just going to kill people with that final ability. You're using, carrion lines, any sack outlet to have your creatures just deal 1 damage, 1,000 cuts again. And I really see the draw card as like a random bonus, but it will probably come into situations where your opponents are like, do I want to block this 1/1? Or let them draw a card, and then your 1/1 will get through, and then you sack it to something else and just hit for another. So I think Garna is going to have a very interesting time trying to figure out, where the balance is between sack effects and going all in on the aggressive attack the opponent strategy for the card draw. But I really want to kind of dig my hands into that puzzle. My second call out is for Tori Davenant, Fury Rider, 1, 2 red and a white for a human knight, 3/3. Vigilance and Trample. Whenever Tori Davenant Fury Rider attacks, all other attacking creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. Other red attacking creatures you control gain Trample. Untap each other white attacking creature you control. So pseudo vigilance. I think that this is one of the coolest sort of aggressive Boros commanders we have at Uncommon. There is Liara Portier, which is just a house, just got into the database as well. So I don't know if Tori can kind of compete with that on the aggressive level, but I think there's a lot of opportunity here for, making a giant board. They're getting buffed. They're given trample. This also goes into a card I mentioned earlier, the Heroic Charge, as almost a backup Tori in the 99, where it can give your creatures +2/+1 and trample. So you don't even need Tori to kind of get those abilities, and people might remove it and think they're safe from a wide board. I'd be very interested to see, can we get a fully aggressive Boros list to the competitive level, and I think Tori might have what it takes to get him there.
I 100% agree. This is, in terms of just like sheer damage coming at you, this is probably one of the best that you can do, if not the best. I was a huge fan when we did our review of the Commander Liara Portier. First of all, that's going to be 5 mana, so it's it's an additional mana, and that focuses more on exiling cards off the top, getting that card advantage. I'm a sucker for card advantage, and I love it that it's in Boros. But if you just want to get the opponent dead, you know, the Liara Portier, like it could win through combat damage, but it also had like a combo or two, I believe, just to finish off because you're able to draw so many cards. But if you just want to get your opponent dead, Torre Diavenant is damn near as efficient as you can get. So I think they're going to play a lot of similar cards, but it's just like, how are we actually closing out the game? Are we going to be actually be in the damage step? Are we going to be in trying to pull off a combo? So I think they both have their place there, but like you said, it's going to take a little bit of finagling just to find the optimized build.
Yeah. And hey, I mean, Keldon Strike Team is in colors. Pay your 5 mana, get your 2/1/1 white soldiers that when you attack with Tori, those become 2/2s with Vig. So it's
extremely true.
And haste. So you can come in swigging.
I just know. I would need to do some research, but I just know that there's some shenanigans where untapping each other white attacking creature you control. I'm sure there's some things that have respectable enough stats and tap abilities that you can, you know, finagle in the combat step and just kind of maybe get a little cute with it. Maybe that's not where we want to be. Maybe we just want to be as much damage as possible.
Yeah.
But I would like to see if there's a way to abuse that.
Anything that has a tap ability, right? Because it specifically doesn't give them vigilance. It's another untap. So maybe you don't need them open as blockers. Maybe you want to use maybe one of those archers that's like deal 2 damage to a target blocking creature.
I'm not gonna lie, we were talking about I think it's Ohabi Caleria, who we notably have not talked about on this because she's not good in this capacity. But yes, there are some archers that I believe do 1 damage to target blocking creature. Well, if that's enough to punch through, then sure, go ahead.
I don't think there's much exert at common. That would be something a little spicy, untapping one of those, because I know that with vigilance is always a potent combination.
The only one I can think of is I remember I played this in like an Amonkhet Redux draft on Arena. There is one that's like a flying 2/2 for like 4 or something, but you can exert it and give all your creatures +1/+1.
Oh.
I don't know if it's an uncommon or a common. If that was a common, that would be worth including and looking into because that's a pretty sick, you know, being able to do that every turn basically is pretty sick.
Definitely.
Just one last commander that I want to talk about. It's Elias Ilkor, Sadistic Pilgrim, the aristocrat of all aristocrats, just a black and a white for a 2/2, has Death Touch, Phyrexian Core Cleric for whatever synergies are there. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under control, you gain a life. Amazing. Soul Warden. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life. Amazing. You know, Suture Priest, whatever. This is just, I feel like this deck just builds itself. Someone just get, you know, Brad Drake V on the phone. He'll build this deck. Yeah, we'll just add the cpdh staples, but like, you know, obviously we have a few now Orzhov lists in the database. They're playing all sorts of just the little like dumpy enter the battlefield.
Yep.
Everybody discards a card, whatever. You know, those sort of like incremental value things, and we can just, you know, we get values off the ETB again. We can sack them for all sorts of stuff, recur them, chip in, can run combos as necessary. This just feels like the most basic, most versatile mid-range sort of thing.
Play it with all your flesh bag effects, and then we just got a new Orzhov flesh bag. Horrible way to describe it, I know. But 1 and a white for a creature, and then kick it for 1 black. ETB, if it's kicked, each player sacrifices a creature. So it's not as abusable in blink strategies as the other ETB sack a creature that costs 3 mana, but for the same cost, you kind of get another one of those effects that are still not as common at common. So my first thought with Ellis is, you know, all the edicts on a creature I can manage. So they enter, gain a life, they die, everyone loses a life and their best creature or their worst creature.
And then eventually, when no one has any 1 creatures, it doesn't matter that you're only attacking for 4 damage a turn with your 1/1s.
Exactly.
This deck, it's not calling out to me as like, oh wow, look at how exciting and interesting this deck is. But I'm just like, this card is just too efficient to not have some version in the metagame. Now, that is all of the uncommons that we wanted to discuss. You know, I'm sure you could make cases for some of the other ones, but we needed to keep this to not a million years long. We talked about 10 extremely powerful and, you know, some... You're right. We'll put the little ish after there. You know, some good includes as well. And we discussed the Abdel Agent of the Iron Throne list, which is, you know, at this point has been now tested and proven in battle.
Indeed.
Chev, is there anything else you wanted to mention on this lovely inaugural episode?
I think the final thing I will say after saying no, I don't want to say anything else, is thanks obviously to the community that really makes this possible. We're looking at decks submitted to the database. Thanks again to Medwards. We are reviewing some of these cards in a more competitive mindset. So if you want like a larger review for PDH in general, of course, check out the PDH Pals or the PDH Pod. Both have released things recently in there. Special shout out to Corey and the Dark Confidants for their work with data on the cpdh database, and especially giving us the lists that show the breakdown of how many times cards show up in various lists. It's a very good tool for kind of establishing when a new card comes out, how likely is it to see play in certain lists, or what effects are missing, and so you can kind of metagame against it. And so really, like, we're being mouthpieces right now, but everything that has kind of let us do this has come from the community. So if you want to keep going and give us ideas for names too, that would be ideal.
Yeah, I echo everything Chev said. And if you want to give us free content, please, the community feels us. If you have an idea for something that you want us to talk about, if you have a list that you want us to discuss, if you're like, hey, I really think that you needed to talk about this one common that you missed because this is going to be broken, hit us up. Obviously, all the contact channels are the same. Hexdrinkers on Twitter, hexdrinkers.com/Patreon, the email, the website, that whole thing.
And if you have any questions, hexdrinkers@gmail.com.
We'll see you all in the next episode. We're excited to start this thing, and we hope you will join us for the journey. Chev.
Please don't sue us.
Chev.